Imagine this. Your peaceful days working as an apothecary comes to an end when you're kidnapped by some men. Sold to the emperor, you spend your days as a lowly servant doing menial chores to care for his concubines, until one day the palace manager discovers your apothecary talents. Now you must serve one of the emperor's royal consorts, the mother of his child, as her personal taste tester for poisons, and uncover the truth about mysterious occurrences within the palace, or face execution by the emperor. This is the story of the Apothecary Diaries. So let's get started and watch the story unfold. A young apothecary girl picking flowers and herbs is sent by her father to deliver some medicine to the verdigris house. He warns her to be careful on her way there, as kidnappings of women are on the rise. The girl, Maomao, claims she'll be fine. She just wants to stop by an herb plot on her way back. She runs through the busy red light district, making her way into the verdigris house, a well-established brothel. Pyrin, one of the most famous courtesans of the brothel, enters, concerned about Maomao's wounds on her arm. Maomao thinks nothing of it. It's just one of her usual drug experiments. The owner of the house, the madam, then enters, scolding Maomao, telling her she better not be setting off explosions again from her so-called experiments. But when the madam offers Maomao courtesan lessons, Maomao storms out, leaving the meds she was sent to deliver behind for the madam. Outside the district, in a field, the sight of herbs makes Maomao light up like a cat, and she picks away with cheer. But it seems the cheer is over, with 3 men here to kidnap her. Now, being escorted through a basket, she knows her father will be worried. 3 months pass, with Maomao working, having been sold as a servant to the emperor's rear palace, a place with a garden of women who are to give birth to the emperor's children. No men are allowed, only the emperor, his kin, and eunuchs, which are men that have been castrated. Overall, the place is a huge collective of 2,000 concubines and servants, and 1,000 eunuchs. And unlike the concubines, servant girls like Maomao are expendable and can lose their lives at any moment. Well, at least she gets paid. Xiaolan, one of Maomao's friends, comes here teary-eyed, asking which room this plate is for. When Maomao directs her, we learn most of the servant girls are illiterate, just taught the bare minimum essentials of etiquette. However, Maomao has no intention of sharing that she can read or write, as all her hard-earned work would just be paid to her kidnappers. Now, she could be given even better treatment as a concubine, but the requirements are good looks. Unfortunately, her freckles, flat chest, and skin and bones look makes her unqualified for the job. She would rather not stand out, as her life would be at risk. All she has to do is work hard, and in 2 years, she'll be allowed to leave. While doing laundry, Xiaolan whispers rumors of a hot eunuch, one who's very popular with all the women. Later, in the dining hall, Xiaolan discusses the rumors of the curse here in the rear palace, a curse that kills all the emperor's heirs born here. So far, all 3 of the emperor's children born here have grown weak and passed away. A doctor went to visit both precious consorts, Lady Gyokuyou and Lady Lihua. With no heirs previously, Lady Lihua giving birth to the prince could give her the title of Empress Consort, and thus should have priority here in the rear palace. But there is a rumor that the emperor actually favors Lady Gyokuyou. Apparently, both mothers and child are sick, with head, stomach aches, and nausea. Hearing this gets Maomao's apothecary brain kicking. While working later, she considers the possibility of poison, illness, and even hereditary issues, and gets curious enough to want to take a quick peek at their conditions. Entering the area where all the high-ranked concubines reside, she notices every building pavilion to be exquisite, even down to the individual pillars. She suddenly hears the sound of a smack, watching the public spectacle of Lady Lihua, who had just finished smacking Lady Gyokuyou onto the ground, blaming Gyokuyou for cursing her son because Gyokuyou bore a daughter. Gyokuyou responds the idea to be absurd, as her daughter Lingli is sick as well. As the two bicker, Maomao thinks the flustered eunuch in the middle to be a quack of a physician. How hasn't he noticed the cause of their ailments when she herself has figured it out with just a single look? Putting all the pieces of information together, especially now seeing how worn out Lady Lihua is, this certainly is no curse. As she wanders out of the crowd, pondering how to tell the two precious consorts, she utters the words, "If only I could find something to write with the manager of the rear palace, Jinshi, taken aback hearing those words. Though turning to see who said them, he finds no one. In her quarters, Lady Lihua finds an important message in a flower, but ends up tossing it aside. A dark night of terror comes as Lady Lihua cries at the death of her son, the young prince. A little under a month later, as everyone continued their work in the palace, they wore black sashes to mourn the passing of the prince heir. In Lady Gyokuyou's quarters, Jinshi hears from her that when she visited the crystal pavilion to have her daughter examined, she had found a note on the windowsill tied to a branch with the words, "The white face powder is poison. Don't let the baby touch it." Both Gyokuyou and Jinshi knew it wasn't from the palace physician. After all, he couldn't figure out how to treat the prince. And thus, Jinshi is now tasked with finding who wrote the note. He smirks, remembering a young servant girl who was literate had passed by him in the crystal pavilion. On another day, the young servant girls are summoned by the high officials, and when Jinshi enters, all the girls blush and gawk at him. Except for Maomao, who wonders who this arrogant-looking woman is. He presents himself as the rear palace manager, and Maomao is surprised that a man so handsome as him is a eunuch, because now he can't have any children. Jinshi then holds up a sign that reads, "You, with the freckles, stay here." Maomao reads it slowly, and oh no, everyone begins to notice her. Jinshi then tells everyone to return to their rooms as he's done with them for the day. Oh man, she's the only servant here who can read. He wrote that just now to single her out. She tries to escape, but Jinshi has no intention of letting her leave. As they walk together, he remarks it was odd after looking her up, because her description said that she couldn't read. Maomao tries to play it off with a meek tone, saying, "I'm of lowly birth. It must be a mistake," determined to never admit it, as pretending to be ignorant makes everything in this world easier. She gets annoyed, wondering how Jinshi found out about the messages. The two make it to Lady Gyokuyou's room, and with the awing of happy little baby Ling Li, Maomao feels relieved. Gyokuyou thanks Maomao as her baby's savior, but Maomao denies these actions as she doesn't want to get involved. However, Jinshi pulls out the note received by Gyokuyou. It's written on a fabric used in the clothing for serving girls. Did Maomao perhaps rip apart her skirt? Making Maomao jump back, covering her backside, knowing she's been caught. Jinshi then has her explain why she put the flower on the windowsill that day. In a more serious tone, Maomao describes that she figured out the makeup powder both Gyokuyou and Lihua had been using was poisoned. Many courtesans used high-end powder in the brothels she grew up in, which had poisoned many of them, causing so many to lose their lives. Trading life for beauty, but losing both. A grim sight. Having worked as an apothecary, she tells the two she knows a few things about poisons. Gyokuyou shows the white powder. It was used by the baby's nurse, who described the whitening to be better compared to other powders. Gyokuyou blamed herself, as she should have paid more attention to the things going on to her baby. Jinshi took blame as well, thinking if he had noticed sooner, more lives could have been saved, including Lady Lihua's baby. Gyokuyou tried to tell Lihua about the message, but sadly, Lihua wouldn't believe her. Given all that, Maomao wonders what her purpose here is. Well, starting today, she is now Gyokuyou's lady-in-waiting. Huh? As she leaves, she thinks, no. She can't keep a low profile now. As some imperial soldiers rest for the evening, two fall over. Have they been poisoned? Jinshi reads a report learning food was cooked by the villagers to serve to the soldiers, and suspected with the crime of aiding barbarians to harm the emperor's legion, the village leader was placed into custody. Gao Shun, Jinshi's attendant, changes the subject, asking about concubine Gyokuyou's new lady-in-waiting, Maomao. Jinshi explains his reasoning to be Gyokuyou only has 4 women serving her, too few compared to concubine Lihua, with the same rank having 10 women serving her. This is not necessarily due to Lihua being given special favor, but really because Gyokuyou is wise and cautious, and would never hire someone of unknown origin. That is the best way to survive as one of the emperor's concubines. Jinshi found Maomao to be the perfect choice as a new lady-in-waiting. Her knowledge of medicine is too valuable to pass up. Gao Shun has some concern that she could abuse that knowledge. However, Jinshi plans on seducing her a little to keep her wrapped around his fingers. As Maomao grabs her stuff to move out, she and Xiaolan spot Jinshi playing with some of the concubines. He comes over to Maomao, prompting her to ask if he needs anything. Upon hearing he doesn't, she wonders why he's here. Does he just have nothing better to do? He then caresses her hair with his hand, softly telling her to serve Lady Gyokuyou well. But this has the opposite effect on her, creeping Maomao out and making her feel disgusted. She then arrives at the Jade Pavilion and is greeted by Gyokuyou's head lady-in-waiting, Hongyan. They meet with Lady Gyokuyou and Ling Li, who are both joyous to see Maomao. Hongyan then shows Maomao around the various stations she'll be working at, until they reach the living room where they meet the 3 other ladies-in-waiting, Yinghua, Guiyuan, and Ailan. But the 3 girls are taken aback seeing Maomao's bandages. Maomao tries to start helping out, but the 3 girls tell her to go rest up and take it easy, getting teary-eyed, explaining that Maomao has a special task coming up. After Maomao leaves, the girls worry Maomao must have gotten abused back at home, and now being given a terrible job, they feel so bad for her. But you'll feel good when you like this video and subscribe to my channel, because here at My Shoujo Weekly, you'll get fun stories like this one on a weekly basis. See, it's in the channel name. I'll be sharing stories in romance, action, and drama, all in the shoujo genre. So come on, hit that subscribe and give me a like. Anyways, the terrible job is being Gyokuyou's official taste tester for poison, which gets Maomao excited like a cat again. I don't think you're supposed to be happy about that. Jinshi explains the food made for concubines changes hands a few times before being brought here, leaving possible time to be poisoned before arrival. In fact, when Gyokuyou was pregnant, her food had been poisoned at least twice. The taster back then received nerve damage and still can't move her hands or feet, which is why the current ladies-in-waiting are sympathetic towards Maomao. She then begins the food tasting, detecting no poison. Back when she lived in the brothels, she ran a lot of experiments on her arm, gradually training her body's immunity towards poisons. Many of them don't even affect her, but she's pleased to be able to get some good food, making Jinshi nervous hearing her laugh. Later, Hongyan praises her skill, mentioning to Maomao if she had said she was literate from the get-go, she could have been getting paid more this entire time. However, Maomao explains that her kidnappers would receive part of the increased pay, and she wouldn't like that. Hearing this, Hongyan goes to hand Maomao an expensive vase, and makes it drop. It's so expensive, Maomao could not possibly afford it with her lady-in-waiting salary, and feigns her scheme, saying they'd probably have to charge her kidnappers for the damages, to which Maomao catches on very quickly. Hongyan then hands Maomao her hazard pay for the food tasting services, payment almost equal to her regular stipend that only goes to Maomao. The next day, Maomao learns quickly that she'll get shoved out for any work other than Gyokuyou's meals. This consequently leaves her bored out of her mind. On a particular day though, Jinshi needs her assistance, but with her usual look towards him, he wonders why his charms don't seem to work on her. He hands her the test materials, some bao zup buns, and upon smelling, she announces there is an aphrodisiac within them, surprising Jinshi that she can smell even without tasting. Jinshi already knew that, however, making Maomao disgusted in disbelief that he'd try to have her eat one, getting Lady Gyokuyou to crack out laughing in tears over the ridiculous exchange. Jinshi then starts to discuss the real reason he brought her here. He discusses the squad of soldiers on a mission to attack some barbarians that were poisoned the other day. They'd fallen ill after a meal, reporting nausea, difficulty breathing, and other ailments. The meal had been prepared in a nearby village, and the soldiers arrested the village leader on conspiracy charges. Luckily, an officer defused the situation and has put the village head's sentence on hold until they get to the bottom of how the poisoning occurred. Maomao ponders this until it comes to her. She learns from Jinshi the meal was eaten at a camp outside, and that the soldiers used their own plates and utensils. With that evidence, she pulls a rhododendron flower out from the vase behind her, tasting it while telling them it actually causes nausea and difficulty breathing. The plant has poisons in the leaves, but some have poisons in the branches or roots. Some wood can even emit poison when burned, and with that, Jinshi has learned it was most likely the wood the soldiers were burning, case closed. However, he isn't done with Maomao yet. He wants her to make an aphrodisiac, which gets her excited at the idea of doing her apothecary work again. She eventually composes herself and agrees to work. But in Jinshi's office, he discusses with Gao Shun about how one of the reasons he's been employed here is to test the loyalty of all the servants and concubines against their temptation, as a concubine must especially be loyal to the emperor and chaste. However, with Maomao's glare of disgust, Jinshi feels super elated? What is wrong with this guy? The next day, Maomao gets excited to begin her apothecary work, meeting with the quack doctor and Gao Shun. She then lights up when presented with the supply room. She begins to work, but gets annoyed with Jinshi on her back. With the main ingredients of milk, butter, sugar, honey, and powdered cacao, she preps some chocolate to cool and harden, but also some extra for herself later that she stores on a shelf. While waiting outside for the chocolates to cool, she gets distracted by herbs outside, getting carried away till the evening, returning to find her 3 associate ladies-in-waiting immersed after eating the aphrodisiacs. Well, at least we know they work. However, Hong Yan gives Maomao a scolding smack. Later that night, Maomao presents the aphrodisiacs, with everyone in shock learning she's going to keep the bigger ones for herself as midnight snacks. Jinshi makes a joke about eating one to test, making Maomao think he'd captivate anyone with his blushed face that's so pretty. After the display, Jinshi caresses Maomao's hair from behind, telling her she did a good job, thanking her before taking off. In the night, a young servant girl spots a white, ghostly woman. When the woman approaches, the girl cowers in terror upon the sight of the creepy being. On another day, in the Jade Pavilion kitchen area, as Maomao prepares cold medicine, Yinghua tells her about the rumor of a spirit haunting the rear palace. And later, Xiaolan confirms the famous ghostly lady in white to her. A ghostly lady who dances in the air under the moonlight, often appearing on the eastern castle walls. Maomao ponders this, knowing the only way to enter is through one of 4 gates, located in north, south, east, and west. And even then, it'd be difficult to break in with the gates always guarded and the wall surrounded by a moat. They say, however, that sunken in the moats are the corpses of concubines who tried to escape. Maomao thinks nothing of this superstition, but Xiaolan is certainly freaked out. In the physician's building, as the court physician Guan is about to serve treats to Maomao, Jinshi appears, making Guan pull away to grab more. Jinshi comes to praise her work, making her think once again that he probably has nothing better to do. She wonders how he has the authority to wander around like he's palace security. Oh, she then surmises he must be the emperor's personal favorite, making him catch on immediately she's thinking something inappropriate. He asks Maomao if she's heard about the spirit haunting, and then how it might relate to sleepwalking, which catches Maomao's attention. Upon asking for a cure for it, Maomao answers there's no medicine that cures somnambulism. However, Jinshi is persistent that she look into it. At night, Gao Shun guides Maomao to the eastern wall, where concubine Fuyu dances under the moonlight. She's a mid-ranking concubine, scheduled to be bestowed to a military officer as a reward. Later, Guan explains Fuyu had stumbled 2 years ago when showing her dancing skills to the emperor, and thus he hasn't laid a finger on her, and she shut herself in ever since. Maomao thinks the shame and failure might be the cause of Fuyu's sleepwalking, but holds out to gather more evidence. As Maomao turns to leave, Guan mentions Fuyu is a princess from a small vassal state, and hopes she gets better because he's sure she doesn't want to go back, which is exactly where she's being sent. She and Gao Shun spy on Lady Fuyu, and compare her to the cotton rose, a large white flower in the morning that turns a deep pink in the evening. Maomao learns from Xiaolan that during Fuyu's sleepwalks, she used to appear in the north, but now has shifted to the eastern wall, giving Maomao the final clue to the puzzle. But she doesn't like this, since her dad always told her not to conclude things based on speculation. She later explains her thoughts at the Jade Pavilion, that back at the brothels, there was a skilled courtesan who had received a purchase offer. However, the offer fell through when she started roaming the brothel at night, as if possessed by a demonic spirit, possibly due to stress, but having no recollection of the night before. Eventually, she was bought off and the sleepwalking stopped. Gyokuyou concludes that the courtesan didn't want to get sold off. The offer was made by a wealthy merchant who had a wife and even grandchildren. Also, the particular courtesan only had 1 year left on her serving term, leaving everyone to wonder if Fuyu was in a similar situation. From that day, Fuyu was forbidden from leaving her room, with eunuchs placed to watch her. Eventually, the day for Lady Fuyu to be sent to marry the military officer came. However, Gyokuyou asked Maomao for the truth, suspecting there was more to what she had told them earlier. They agree to keep her speculation secret, and Maomao explains there was actually another courtesan whose purchase offer was called off for the same reason as the first one she mentioned. However, this courtesan later received another purchase offer, but since she was deemed ill due to sleepwalking, the price was cut in half. It was all fraud, however. The two men who made purchase offers knew each other. The woman pretended to be sick to call off the first offer. Then the real purchaser made a bid at half the price, as a way for the courtesan to be with a man she loved who could afford her purchase price. Maomao thinks Fuyu is in a similar situation, being that she and the military officer are childhood friends that grew up in the same homeland. This officer showed his valor in a battle against barbarians the other day, and when asked for a reward, he strongly insisted on receiving concubine Fuyu. As a military officer, he could never think of proposing to a princess. But with Fuyu being pulled into the rear palace, and her possibly having feelings for her childhood friend, she might have purposely failed at her first dance in front of the emperor, and thus the emperor never touched her, leaving her body pure. That being said, with her being given away, the emperor could have still found interest in her, so she must have feigned somnambulism to avoid his interest. The battles with the barbarians happened in the east, so Fuyu must have danced on the eastern wall as a prayer for his safe return, but it's all speculation. However, we get to see Lady Fuyu blushed face to face with the man of her dreams, and upon watching the two lovers, Gyokuyou mentions her envy of her. On another day, we see concubine Li Hua's ladies-in-waiting berating Maomao for trying to serve their lady non-luxurious food. She never would have come to the Crystal Pavilion, but unfortunately, the other day when she had done taste testing in front of the emperor had a personal request for the famous Apothecary. With concubine Li Hua unwell, he wanted Maomao to cure what ails her. In this country, the word of the emperor is the word of the heavens. Were she to decline, that would be grounds enough for beheading, so she accepted. However, Maomao found it incredible for Li Hua's ladies to treat her like this, despite her being on imperial order. Well, they probably just hate her because she's a servant of Lady Gyokuyou, and with that, she gets quickly thrown out. In the lunch hall, Xiaolan discusses how Lady Li Hua must still be sick from the white powder, even though it's been banned from the palace entirely. She congratulates Maomao on getting orders directly from the emperor himself, but all Maomao thinks is that the emperor must really not trust the court physician. We then move to the palace kitchen area, because in looking after Lady Li Hua, the first thing Maomao set out to do was improve her diet. First, the poison needed to be expelled from her body, so she needed to consume porridge with lots of fiber. She would attempt to bring another meal to Li Hua, only to get scolded by her ladies again, telling her this is no place for lowly girls like herself, getting Maomao kicked out once again. On another attempt, Maomao sees the incredibly rich food being brought by Li Hua's ladies, even noting their nutritional value. Those foods are too heavy for a sick person's weakened stomach. They tried feeding Li Hua, and Maomao was absolutely right, seeing the sickly concubine choke on the food, needing it to be washed down with water. The ladies blame Maomao for ruining the atmosphere, so she gets thrown out again, except this time, Jinshi and Gao Shun spot the occurrence. Another day goes by, with Maomao wondering how long until she's beheaded for her inability to complete her task. But this time, Jinshi is here to help her. He tells Li Hua's ladies-in-waiting that it's not befitting of beautiful and talented ladies like you to ignore the emperor's arrangements, hitting them with the Jinshi signature charms. Maomao finally brings some food to Li Hua, now realizing she still has the will to eat, despite the depression from losing her son. She wipes Li Hua's face, noticing the white powder come off. Oh no, it's the same white powder from before. Maomao then goes up to the lady-in-waiting that's in charge of Li Hua's makeup, and with a glaring look, she smacks the lady onto the ground. Oh my god! Maomao is perfectly justified, because she's punishing this idiot, as she begins dragging this girl and dumps the banned powder all over her. Maomao gets down, coldly telling the woman that the poison would infect her whole body after a while, and she should be glad because she'll still look pretty too, just like her beloved Lady Li Hua. Pale, bloodless skin, sunken eye sockets, a body unable to even eat. How come this fool couldn't understand why this stuff was banned? With Maomao dragging the woman to look directly at her sickly master, and pulling her back face to face with Maomao, Maomao berated her for having no thoughts in her head, With the woman now teary-eyed, Maomao yelled at her, asking who would be happy to be poisoned with the same thing that killed their son. Maomao then commanded the other ladies with authority to clean this mess on the floor. Afterwards, Maomao began taking care of Li Hua every day, while the one who had hid the powder was put in confinement, and the eunuch who was to retrieve the powder was punished by flagellation. One day, with Maomao by her side, Lady Li Hua asked her why she didn't just let her die, to which Maomao plainly responded if she truly wanted to die, she could have just stopped eating. She eats because in truth, she wants to live. Li Hua reminisces about her deceased baby boy, realizing the truth to this. The days continue with Maomao's treatment of Lady Li Hua, and one day, the lady who had been in charge of the makeup was released from confinement. She assured Maomao she'd never make that mistake again, telling Maomao she'll take over so that Maomao could finally rest. With her finally being able to serve her master again, Li Hua's lady-in-waiting shed tears of joy at her recovery. And after about 2 months, Lady Li Hua was able to walk by herself again. And with Maomao now finally able to rest, Lady Li Hua came by to caress and appreciate her savior. The day came for Maomao to finally leave the crystal pavilion. Li Hua asked her if she's incapable of birthing another child. When Maomao responded she didn't know and that Li Hua should try again, Li Hua answered back that the emperor's love for her is gone, only for Maomao to explain the emperor had sent her directly. So, Maomao believes the emperor will visit Li Hua soon. Even after hearing this, Li Hua wondered how she could ever beat Lady Gyokuyou. However, Maomao answered, "It's not a matter of winning and losing. There are hundreds, thousands of flowers in the world, but who can decide whether a peony or a bellflower is more beautiful?" To which Li Hua answers she has neither jade eyes or bright hair. But Maomao can see Li Hua has other assets, with sheer size and magnificent shape. Maomao then tells Li Hua about a secret technique she learned from women at the brothel house, involving these assets, which leaves Li Hua flushing red. Unfortunately, Maomao doesn't have the right figure for something like that. Wooden swords clash as Jinshi spars with one of his attendants, Ba Sen, Jinshi being the victor. While getting scrubbed down afterwards, Jinshi asks Gao Shun how Maomao is doing, remembering the unexpected sight of Maomao slapping and scolding Li Hua's makeup lady. Elsewhere, Maomao has lunch with Xiaolan, who explains there's a rumor of a palace servant who was able to seduce a military officer that was famous for hating women, with Xiaolan whispering, "They say she used an aphrodisiac," making Maomao nervous, remembering the ones she gave to Jinshi. In the physician's building, Maomao shows Guan some fresh matsutake mushrooms, to which the two enjoy grilled with soy sauce. However, a shaken man barges in, asking if they can make a medicine that cures curses, and then presents his hands to have disgustingly red blotches. But Maomao identifies them as just rashes. Probably ointment would do fine. So as she prepares some, the man speaks of the curse that began 2 nights ago. Trash from the rear palace gets burned in a pit on the west side. The man was doing his usual work and found some weird writing tablets. He tossed them in the trash and the fire illuminated in different colors. Then upon looking at his hands, he saw them suddenly cursed. Maomao then began sticking one of these tablets into a fire and changed the color by sprinkling different materials onto it, explaining this is like how fireworks work. She then explains what's on his hand is no curse, but simply that there was material on the tablets that night that gave him a rash. So with that, she hands him his ointment cure. Jinshi then enters to applaud Maomao's work. He takes her to learn more about the burning tablets, and orders Gao Shun to find anyone else with the rashes. As Maomao wanders away, she surmises the colored wood tablets are most likely some kind of code. Back in the Jade Pavilion, the ladies-in-waiting get Maomao dressed up for the garden party. Twice a year, the emperor and his high officials gather in the courtyard to enjoy food and entertainment. Since the emperor is unmarried and has no princess consorts, it is customary to bring the upper first-rank concubines, the 4 high-ranking concubines who are the best contenders for empress consorts. There is no particular task to complete at the event. They're just invited guests who must follow the emperor. Yinghua gets fired up, with this being Princess Lingli's first public appearance. And with this being a rare event with all 4 high-ranking concubines, it's going to be an all-out war to show which is best. Later, Gao Shun reports not finding anyone with the rash burns on their arms. so they can only hope things go smoothly at the garden party tomorrow. At the sight of the dolled up Lady Gyokuyou, her ladies gush at her beauty. It is said that crimson suits her better than anyone else in the land. Gyokuyou presents them all jewelry to represent them as her ladies, and then they hold Maomao to prep her for the event. And after wiping her face, Maomao sighs because they caught her. The 4 high concubines Gyokuyou, the precious consort, Li Hua, the wise consort, Li Shu, the virtuous consort, and Ah Duo, the pure consort, enter the garden area. Jinshi comes to greet Gyokuyou's group, mostly to check on Maomao, and upon seeing her face, he's stun-locked, not recognizing her at first with her beauty. He asks if she's wearing makeup because her freckles are gone, but actually, she isn't. She simply removed them. The freckles were actually makeup. That's why they're gone. With Jinshi confused, she explains that every day she puts dried clay on her face to add freckles, so she'd technically been wearing makeup the entire time. This only left him more confused. Why would she do such a thing? Well, it's to prevent being dragged into a back alley, and hearing her horrible upbringing leaves Jinshi shocked. Even though Maomao lived near the brothels, not every man left sexually satisfied. Some had empty wallets, violent tendencies, and venereal diseases. She knew a short, skinny, ugly girl rarely would be a target. And even though she never got dragged into a back alley, she still got kidnapped. Hearing her story made Jinshi feel regretful, apologizing for not being able to police those men. To Maomao, it's whatever though. A buyer can't tell if one was kidnapped or just sold off legally. It still makes Maomao mad, but it's not Jinshi's fault things ended up this way. He apologized to her again, getting close and leaving a hairpin in her hair, with his face blushed. Maomao examined it, not quite sure why he gave her this hairpin, and all the ladies in waiting came by to congratulate her. But before Maomao could get an explanation on what this pin meant, the sounds of drum beating meant the event was starting, with the high concubines sitting in their appropriate positions, and the emperor watching from the center. Gyokuyou's ladies-in-waiting huddled together to deal with the cold winds at the event. And watching the event, Maomao feels like the arrangement is made to instill rivalry between the 4 concubines. Amongst them, holding Princess Ling Li is the Empress Dowager, Anshi, the current emperor's mother. With her youthful looks, Maomao is disturbed to hear she gave birth to the emperor at 11 years old. We learn Anshi has 2 children, the emperor and his younger brother, who is rumored to be too sickly to leave the house. Behind Maomao and Guiyan, Yinghua is upset hearing Li Hua's ladies calling them ugly, and especially hiring that ugly girl Maomao, which leaves Maomao surprised that they can't recognize she's right in front of them, especially with Maomao having scared the one insulting them, saying she'd perform all sorts of dangerous experiments on her body. Maomao then gave the girl a vicious expression, reminding her of who she is, frightening the girl and making her drag her friend away. Looking at Maomao, Gyokuyou's ladies always felt sympathetic. Growing in poverty, she ruined her face daily because of her distrust in men. 2 months of bullying at the Crystal Pavilion, and despite all this, Maomao is always thinking about taking care of them. They conclude this is why Lord Jinshi looks after her. But Maomao thinks they're totally delusional. Anadua's ladies in purple begin scolding Li Shu's ladies for dressing Li Shu in crimson. The 2 groups have always been at odds, with Li Shu being the youngest at 14 and Anadua being 35. Even more awkward, we learn they used to be daughter and mother-in-law. It's a little complicated, but one was the previous emperor's concubine and another the current emperor's. With the emperor passing and this concubine still pure, she eventually became the current emperor's. Maomao ponders this until she hears that it was actually Li Shu, who was 5 years ago at the age of 9, actually the mother-in-law, not Adua, who was 30 at the time. As Li Shu passes by Maomao, Maomao remarks a white dress would suit her better, and the crimson obviously clashes with Lady Gyokuyou. Elsewhere in the event, as Maomao is walking, she stumbles upon a man named Li Haku, who offers her a hairpin. It looks like he's handing them out to everyone, so no servant feels left out. Thus, she takes one before he brightly takes off, making her think he's like a dog. Looking at the pin, Lady Li Hua arrives, believing Maomao should have more, presenting Maomao with her own personal pin before taking off. However, what is she to do with all these pins? Later, the food tasting for the high concubines begins. Maomao handles things just fine, but the taste tester next to her is certainly freaking out. The life of a taste tester is expendable. Only Maomao could be a freak that enjoys eating poison, now wishing for some pufferfish because she found the stinging sensation on the tongue to be wonderful. The next dish is vinegar fish and vegetables, a favorite of the emperor's. It usually includes blueback, but for some reason, it's jellyfish. The emperor's cook would never make a mistake like this, so Maomao concluded that the server messed up. However, watching Lady Li Shu freak out over the fish, Maomao wonders if Li Shu doesn't like it, but she can't refuse to eat it in front of the emperor. Then looking over, Maomao watches Lady Li Shu's taste tester give a wicked smirk, wishing she hadn't seen it. Upon tasting the next dish, Ihaku is astonished from far away, seeing Maomao elated. She licks her lips, making him wonder just how delicious the soup is, only for Maomao to determine it was poisoned. Maomao begins taking her leave. Jinshi arrives at the scene, hearing the minister try the soup next and collapse. Jinshi finds Maomao, who is oddly happy despite swallowing the toxin. He grabs her arm, trying to take her to the infirmary, but she tells him she already coughed it up, even though she would have loved to swallow all of it. Leaving it coursing through her veins while she'd be spazzing on the ground? With a gluttonous beauty, she asks him for the rest of the soup, only for him to call her an idiot. He explains the minister tried the soup after she declared it to be poisoned, just to verify the truth, and he collapsed from it. Maomao then pulls out an emetic agent from her dress, which will help the minister throw it all up. Jinshi takes it, but still drags Maomao with a more serious attitude that she isn't used to. She prefers him like this somewhat. At the palace infirmary, as Maomao pukes, she marvels at the good drugs she received to help. And she's bright again, all empty now. Jinshi wants to learn more about who was trying to poison Lady Gyokuyou, so Maomao suggests bringing a certain someone. So they meet with Lady Li Shu, and as they exchange greetings, Maomao spots her scratching her arm. Maomao lifts Li Shu's sleeves to see her covered in rashes. She knew it. Li Shu has an allergy to mackerel. Maomao explains that she herself is allergic to buckwheat. She had once tried to build a tolerance for it. It just made her throat swell and her breathing difficult. Even just a little would cause rashes. Li Shu wondered how she knew, so Maomao explained the vinegar dish used a different ingredient from the usual one, meaning Lady Li Shu's dish got swapped with Lady Gyokuyou's dish by mistake. Upon hearing this, Li Shu's lady-in-waiting's eyes widened as if she had made a mistake. As Maomao explains, this is not about Li Shu being a picky eater, and that feeding her something like this knowingly is the same as poisoning her. This makes the lady-in-waiting sweat in further regret. And as Maomao hands her a list of things Li Shu needs to avoid eating, Maomao gives one of her most deadly glares. Jinshi concluded the server had truly messed up, with Maomao speculating the poison wasn't actually meant for Gyokuyou, but instead Li Shu. And with everything concluding, Jinshi continued to ponder if this assassination was somehow related to the colored burning tablets from earlier. A young Maomao would always follow after her father. This was just a dream of hers, which left her wondering how her dad was doing. After last night's garden party poisoning, her associate ladies-in-waiting had thrown her into bed, so she finally got a good deal of rest. But sleeping till noon was still too much for her. Showing up to work, Lady Gyokuyou noticed Maomao's freckles on again, which Maomao desired to keep on because she's uncomfortable without them. Gao Shun is here, presenting the soup that Lady Gyokuyou was about to drink, so that Maomao can examine it. Maomao then prepares cotton, powder, and a brush. She uses a technique with them to reveal fingerprints, the fingerprints from people who touched the bowl after it was wiped clean. She deduces the bowl having been held by 4 people. First, 3 people touched the side of the bowl, one who poured the soup, one who carried it, and Lady Li Shu's taster. Then, one more, an outsider that touched the rim of the bowl. That outsider is the one who most likely poisoned the food. But Gao Shun questions why Li Shu's taster fingerprints are also there. Maomao answers that the taster was most likely harassing Lady Li Shu, not knowing it was poisoned. Gao Shun is surprised to hear a lady-in-waiting bullying a high-ranking concubine. However, Maomao opens with, "This is all just conjecture," reminding Gao Shun of Li Shu's dress color, remarking it as odd that knowing what Gyokuyou's dress color was going to be, they hadn't recommended a different one. And also, Li Shu's ladies-in-waiting weren't even matching her outfit like all the other concubine ladies. This made Li Shu appear like an idiot who can't read the room. She then remembered Dua's ladies scolding Li Shu's for not doing their jobs. The palace is full of enemies, and the only people a concubine can truly trust is her ladies. Maomao suspected Li Shu's to have recommended the bad dress color, and she'd worn it without realizing they'd done it to humiliate her, and even the food swapping that occurred. Albeit the taster didn't know it was poisoned. But still, Maomao found their whole relationships to be distasteful. The motivation to harass Li Shu most likely being that she's wed to the current emperor when she was wed before to the previous one. Culturally, they're taught a wife must sacrifice everything to devote to her husband, and the act of marrying a deceased husband's son is an indecency beyond words. Understanding the motivations behind Li Shu's bad relationship with her ladies, Gao Shun only has one more question. Why did Maomao try to cover for Li Shu's taster the other day? And just hearing this gets Maomao in offensive cat mode. She felt empathy, knowing the life of a servant girl is worthless compared to a concubine, especially the life of a food taster. During lunch the next day, after hearing Maomao got some hairpins, Xiao Lan casually mentions Maomao can get out of the rear palace now, making Maomao freak out, wanting to learn more details. Normally, they are unable to meet men from the outside at the rear palace, but with special permission, a man can escort a female worker outside. With the gifted hairpins, a woman can ask someone to take them out of the palace. Li Haku gets notice that someone had taken his consolation pin seriously, remembering the only one he gave a pin to that served the Jade Pavilion to be that girl. He wonders how he can turn her down. Maomao meets with him, and he immediately asks who she is. After learning she wanted to visit home, Li Haku gets pretty serious, hearing the audacity of a mere lady-in-waiting asking a military officer to vouch for her to leave. He scolds her for trying to exploit him, but no, she does have something to offer him in return. Introductions to the verdigris house with the 3 princess courtesans, or even a single night with one of them would cost most men their yearly salary. Pairin, Joka, Maomao, he can take his pick with these introduction tablets. However, Li Haku is in disbelief as not even the highest ranking officials can afford one of them. But if he refuses, she has other options she can choose from, showing her 2 hairpins, one with rose quartz and one with silver. Li Haku realizes those are from people who obviously outrank him. Pulling her bargaining chips, Li Haku folds to her gambit. Sometime later, Jinshi finished all the paperwork he was buried in. So now with the time to visit Maomao, he found out she had already left. He was broken after hearing Gyokuyou tell him she's already left with someone else. Teasing him gave her a chuckle. However, she explained it was just a 3-day homecoming, nothing else. The pleasure district where Maomao grew up is actually walking distance from the rear palace. Just beyond the walls and moats, they arrive at the verdigris house, and when Maomao goes to greet the madam, she gets an uppercut to the gut, knocking her over. The madam comes over, having heard about Li Haku already, a rising military star with a handsome face and a good build. She tells a girl to get Pairin, the eldest princess, to serve some tea for him. Afterwards, we learn the madam is covering for Maomao, having learned she was kidnapped over 10 months ago, but wants her to bring more young men like Li Haku so they can drain their bank accounts over a long period of time. Soon after, Maomao finally returns home to meet her father, who casually welcomes her home. As he continues to work, she shares all of her experiences in the rear palace and everything she'd gone through for hours on end. And by the end, as the father watches her rest, he thinks of her ending up at the rear palace to be a twist of fate. The day begins with Maomao just getting out of bed. A little girl from a brothel knocks on her house door and drags Maomao back to a brothel house to see a man and a woman passed out. She hits herself to focus up, and she and one of the courtesans perform CPR on the two. And afterwards, Maomao successfully saves them. Post-success, she analyzes the situation. The two who had collapsed were a courtesan and her customer, the room filled with the scent of alcohol and tobacco. She notices wheat, a pipe, and some tobacco leaves. The girl from earlier who brought Maomao over brings Maomao some charcoal she had requested, and when Maomao tells the girl to bring her father later, as the girl leaves, she has a devious look on her face. Maomao's father enters the scene, and while examining the room, he remarks Maomao's medical work to be not bad. He teaches her as he's still much further ahead in terms of medical knowledge, and she still has a lot to learn. As they're enjoying snacks as well as payment from the brothel's proprietor, Maomao speculates the event being a double self-end, where the man can afford to buy out the courtesan, and instead the two lovers chose to end their lives together. But he seemed quite handsome and wore expensive clothing, not really the type to be short on money or women. Maomao then noticed the little girl from earlier walk by, heading towards the room where the man was staying. She followed. Seeing the little girl about to end his life, Maomao pulls the blade away. However, the little girl tells Maomao this man deserves to die. The little girl desperately reaches to take the knife back, but Maomao headbutts her, leaving the little girl in tears. Then, one of the courtesans enters, and upon seeing what had transpired, asks to speak to Maomao about this. The courtesan explains that the man was always a problem customer. He'd sweet-talk a courtesan and insinuate on buying her out, but when he got tired of one, he'd dump her and move on. He was widely hated. Some woman tried to stab him even, poisoned in the past by another courtesan. However, his rich merchant father pampers him, settling everything with money. This little girl's older sister got dumped by him too. On the day of her buyout, he suddenly cancelled, even though she loved him. The courtesan who drank the poison today was close with the older sister as well. They pleaded with Maomao to keep this all a secret. Back at home, Maomao still pondered the whole event, thinking it doesn't make sense for the man to have committed a double self-end, with Maomao's father reminding her not to make conclusions based on conjecture, as it's clear he's already figured out what happened. Thinking of all the events, she realizes it was definitely a murder attempt by the courtesan, and not a double self-end. The courtesan used drinks laced with tobacco poison, and even though the man was on guard from previous poisoning attempts, she convinced him to drink it by drinking some herself, with a special trick: 2 cups, 1 drink. Different drinks have different densities. Pouring a lighter drink slowly over a heavier drink, one can create a pretty looking layered drink. The courtesan then used a wheat stalk to drink just the lower layer, without raising suspicion, but the top layer contained the poison, from which the man drank and passed out from. Afterward, she drank from the top as well, but just a little, not enough to kill her. The beautiful courtesan, who seemed quite fragile, was actually quite clever. And Maomao wondered if all the girls in the brothel were in on it, because she shouldn't conclude based on conjecture. Maomao really missed this pleasure district. In essence, it's no different from the rear palace, both being a garden and a cage. The stale, trapped air poisons everyone. The courtesans eat the poison around them to become a sweet poison themselves. Maomao then went to take a refreshing bath at the verdigris house. One of the 3 princesses, Maomao, enters, and while the two bathe together, she expresses how much Pairin, Joka, and the madam missed her. Even though Maomao couldn't tell, the madam was acting normal so she would feel welcome. Maomao suggests Maomao visit the annex before she leaves, and when she does, it's a dark, depressing sight. Before she knew it, Maomao's 3-day homecoming had come to an end. She met back with Lihaku, who was totally caught up by Pairin, but now Maomao has to come back with new customers every time. Coming back, Maomao wonders why Jinshi has such an intense stare. She tries to leave to go change, but Jinshi stops her, telling Maomao he'll be waiting for her at the parlor. They meet later, and he seems really upset for some reason. He asks her about her time home, but more importantly, how was Lihaku? Maomao wonders how he knows who that is, but she answers he was simply her guarantor. Jinshi became depressed, though, that his pin lost out to a consolation one. Ooh, he was totally jealous. She apologized for not using his hairpin, but she couldn't think of a repayment that he would enjoy. Jinshi became concerned. What kind of repayment? Maomao explains she granted Lihaku a night of blissful dreams, which made him very happy. And hearing this, Jinshi became shaken, and he dropped his cup, completely stun-locked. After Maomao cleaned him up, she came out to Lady Gyokuyou cracking up in laughter, and Hong Yen scolds her with a smack for breaking Jinshi's heart over this misunderstanding. On another day, Gao Shun wonders how long Jinshi is gonna sulk. He's not used to Jinshi responding so childishly. He remembers it took considerable effort to get Lady Gyokuyou to stop laughing and explain everything, clearing up that Lihaku received payment from Maomao by having him meet a star courtesan. That being said, Jinshi had put a lot of effort to clear his work, only to hear Maomao had suddenly left with another man. It had to have been shocking. Later that night, a man barged into Jinshi's office asking for help, and the next day, Jinshi met with Maomao, as he had learned a bureaucrat he was acquainted with died while drinking the night before. He wanted to know if Maomao really thought alcohol had killed him. Elsewhere, Maomao explains that anyone who likes alcohol should know that it is poison in essence. Drinking constantly can sicken the organs. Drinking too much in one sitting can lead to death. Jinshi then explains that Conan died at a party for a group of coworkers, and heard he had a lot to drink, but he was well known for being able to really handle a lot. Conan was a dynamic warrior who drank entire jars of alcohol and had a well-liked personality. Jinshi then had Maomao test the alcohol from the event. No poison in it, but it certainly was a sweet drink that had salt added to it. Conan had a serious sweet tooth, never laying a finger on even the finest smoked meats and rock salts. Even though he used to like spicy food, one day he developed a sweet tooth. With this bit of information, Maomao also learned there were rock salts, mooncakes, and dried meat at the party. She then asked him to retrieve the jar Master Conan was drinking from. After reading a report and examining the broken jar, she found there was salt on the inside. Strange how Conan had developed a sweet tooth. When the jar contained so much salt, it left crystals behind when it dried. Salt is essential to the human body, but too much can be poisonous. So given the amount he drank with salt included, Maomao closed the case with salt poisoning being the reason. She then hands Jinshi the report, saying Conan had lost the ability to taste salt, and thus couldn't tell he was drinking it. Maomao had learned that many years ago, he had lost his wife and child to an epidemic, and from that day on, he worked all day, every day. There is an illness where one loses sense of taste, caused by an unbalanced diet or stress. Maomao had no clue who would have put excessive salt in Conan's drink, but they could have done it just to prank him, not necessarily with malicious intent. However, Jinshi still mourned the man's passing. Conan had helped him a lot when he was younger, but with the night coming to a close, not everything was peaceful, as a woman sunk to the bottom of the moat. The next day, Maomao examines the woman, learning she was a servant from the rear palace. Physician Guan is usually supposed to handle stuff like this, but he's a little baby. However, Maomao can't do this alone, as she's not allowed to touch corpses. Jinshi finds it surprising, even though Maomao is used to the sight of them, since the pleasure district itself is only one step away from lawless chaos. However, she made a promise to her father to never touch corpses, because humans can become medicinal ingredients too. Given her curiosity, it wouldn't be long before she starts to dig up graves, so she must never cross that line. The court physician freaks out having to give an autopsy, but just from looking, Maomao can see she's tall, wore hard wooden shoes, had bandages on one foot, fingers all red. It must have been cold in that water. Jinshi explains the woman was in fact a servant who worked normally the other day. The guard believes she climbed the wall last night and threw herself in the moat. Maomao can't tell if it was a self-end, but is sure she had to be assisted by someone. After all, there are no ladders on the wall and no climbing tools, with the walls being at least 4 times Maomao's height. But there is a place where concubine Fuyu had climbed up to dance on walls under the moon previously. Still though, it would have been difficult for the servant who died to have climbed up, given her bound feet. Foot binding is a custom where small feet are considered beautiful. It's not done to all women, but they do have a distinct walking style when you see them. Maomao is still unsure whether or not it was a self-end or murder, but she believes the woman was still alive when she had fallen in. She must have clawed at the walls to try to climb out, as her fingers were bloodied and red. Self-end or murder? Maomao would never take her own life. She'd hate to be killed by someone else too, because if she died, she wouldn't be able to test any more drugs or poisons. Jinshi walked over to her, wondering what she was lost in thought about. Maomao replied, she wondered what kind of poison she would use to die. She's not trying to die, but nobody knows when it'll happen. Even if it's not something they wished for, a malicious third party can cause an undesired death, like Master Conan. Maomao reflects on all the horrifying events that had transpired. With a moment of silence between her and Jinshi, she then asks him to make sure, if he's ever tasked with executing her, that he makes sure it's with poison. He freaks out, wondering where that's coming from, but logically, if Maomao were ever to make a mistake, he would probably be the one to be given the order. Despite now realizing she might be stepping on Jinshi's heart a bit, she apologizes but still acknowledges she's a commoner. Her life could be taken away over the slightest mistake. Jinshi tells her he'd never do such a thing, only for her to respond, "It's not a would or would not type of issue. It's a can or cannot," making his face grow solemn, acknowledging the truth in her words. Maomao later learned the dead servant was at the garden party where the poisoning took place. They found a will with some relevant content and closed the case as a self-end. On another day, Gao Shun reports finally finding the one with the burn marks on their arms from the colored fire. It's Fa Ming from the garden pavilion, head lady in waiting under concubine Duo. It's lunchtime and Xiaolan discusses the rumor of the woman who had self-ended by jumping in the moat. Hearing it was the woman who poisoned Lady Li Shu's food at the garden party. The woman apparently served concubine Duo, who is apparently going to lose her title and be replaced by a younger concubine soon. Lady Duo is 1 year older than the emperor at 35. She had a male baby with him once, but lost him. Maomao wondered if Li Hua would be replaced if she couldn't have another baby. There's also no guarantee that Lady Gyokuyou will continue to have the emperor's love. Even the most beautiful flowers will wilt over time. The flowers of the rear palace are meaningless unless they bear fruit. Later, Maomao attends a tea party at the Jade Pavilion with guest Lady Li Shu, with Li Shu's taster a little distraught seeing Maomao, but it's not like Maomao would bite her head off. The tea pouring begins, with a bit of honey. However, Li Shu seems freaked out, with her ladies speaking in hushed whispers about her being a picky eater again. Maomao breathes a sigh at the sight of Li Shu's stupid ladies. It signals to Gyokuyou the tea isn't a good idea. Gyokuyou orders the tea to be switched out with hot ginger water, and with the scoffing expressions from Li Shu's ladies, Maomao gets even more annoyed. Outside the living room, Maomao sees Jinshi's arrival. Looks like he was the one who arranged the tea party. She tries to leave, but of course he has to stop her for something. He wants her to start working at the Garnet Pavilion tomorrow to find out more information on the woman who tried to poison Lady Li Shu. Mansions are painted in their master's colors. Figuratively speaking, concubine Gyokuyou's Jade Pavilion feels homey, Li Hua's Crystal Pavilion felt refined and noble, while the Garnet Pavilion, home to Duo, was practical and simple, yet polished and classy. Duo, the pure, enters, with Maomao detailing her as neither showy nor voluptuous. She has an androgynous, almost gallant kind of beauty. If dressed differently, she'd pass as a young civil servant. She might even look better in a riding suit, instead of her skirt and dress. But why does she remind Maomao of someone? They're shown around the place by Fa Ming, as their task is to help clean the place. Maomao notices the servants at the Garnet Pavilion to be hard workers, something the idiots from the Crystal Pavilion could learn from. Spending time with Fa Ming, Maomao finds her to be friendly, observant, and praising of others. In her guest sleeping quarters, Maomao swells the sweetness of the candle before laying in bed for the night. The next day as she works, she wonders if the mastermind behind the poisoning was really here. All the servants here are hard-working, even head lady-in-waiting Fa Ming. With her being well past her prime though and having good qualities for a wife, Maomao wondered why she never married. Was it to dedicate herself to concubine Duo? Strong loyalty is a possible motive for poisoning. With a new concubine coming to enter, Duo's position is most at risk. But what if a vacancy opened elsewhere first? This emperor is only interested in ripened fruit, so he doesn't visit Lady Li Shu. That's fine, given her age of 14, but one could also claim she's not serving her role as concubine. If someone were to poison someone for Duo, targeting Li Shu isn't out of the question. Maomao then gets called to help another servant, and in this room are jars full of honey, delivered by Fa Ming's family, as they own an apiary, a place where bees are kept. No wonder there was so much honey here despite it being so expensive. Meaning the sweet smell from the candle last night was honey. Maomao then notices Li Shu wandering by the Garnet Pavilion. But why only with her taster? Later, Maomao gives her report to Jinshi, saying the prime suspect is Fa Ming, given she has bandages wrapped around her arms. The colored text plates that were burned in the garbage fire were wrapped in a woman's dress with burns on the sleeves. But she doesn't feel the gentle Fa Ming could be part of a conspiracy. Jinshi does some flirty harassing with some honey, and something clicks in Maomao's mind, putting all the pieces together. There's something about the honey. Gyokuyou arrives, not so happy to see Jinshi's attempts to stick honey in Maomao's mouth, but he runs away. Maomao then heads with Gao Shun to Li Shu's pavilion. She tries to ascertain why Li Shu doesn't like honey, but she doesn't have a particular allergen to it. She just remembers there was a life-threatening event when she was a baby that involved it, and her nurses told her not to eat it. Then, when Maomao mentions Fa Ming's name, Li Shu gives a distraught look. Afterwards, Maomao wants to know if there's a place she can learn about past events from the rear palace. So Gao Shun gets her some records from the palace library. She learns 17 years ago, when the current emperor was still a prince, he had a son with concubine Dua. The baby is gone now, but was born around the same time as the prior emperor's son, the current emperor's little brother. Dua used to be the current emperor's only concubine, and she was apparently his foster sibling. Their baby had been delivered by Dr. Lo Men, which shocked Maomao, but she always had a hunch. With several of the herbs growing in the rear palace being the same ones she used growing up, someone must have transplanted them there. A man who drags his feet like an old woman. A doctor overqualified for the position of a pleasure district apothecary. A former eunuch with a bone removed from one knee. Why was her father expelled from the palace? The next day, Maomao presents something to Fa Ming, something they need to talk about. Fa Ming begins to chop bread, served with honey. Pleasantries normal for a guest to the pavilion. However, Fa Ming's smile seems uncanny. Maomao asks where they're moving to, because with everything packed, it's pretty clear now that Dua is being replaced because she's infertile. Maomao asks for details about what happened during the birth of Dua's child. And when Maomao explains her father was the doctor, Fa Ming jolts up in astonishment. Maomao deduced that with Dua's baby being born at the same time as the Empress Dowager's, the imperial doctor had given priority to the Empress, taking too long to make it to Dua. She lost her uterus, and lost her baby soon after. Fa Ming stares completely distraught, because Maomao has figured it all out, despite her father being a quack, as claimed by Fa Ming. Fa Ming looks at Maomao coldly, with the eyes of a killer. As Maomao presents the cause of Dua's death, a flower and some honey. Many flowers have poison in them, like aconite or azalea. Their nectar can be poisonous too. Fa Ming knows that now, but back then she didn't. She didn't realize regular honey with no poison, what she believed was good for health, could have been harmful to a newborn baby. With Dua still recovering, she trusted her head lady-in-waiting, but that very trust was what caused the baby's death. The cause was then treated as a mystery, and with Maomao's father blamed for the mistakes, he was expelled. But later, Fa Ming learned the actual cause of the baby's death. Someone taught her that honey can be poisonous to babies. She had to make sure Dua never found that out. That's why she tried to eliminate Lady Li Shu. During the emperor's previous reign, Li Shu was close to Dua. They were both fond of each other. A young girl taken from her parents, a woman who could no longer give birth. There may have been a type of codependency that developed. During that time, Fa Ming learned from Li Shu that she almost died eating honey as a baby, and to stop Dua from ever hearing that story, she chased Li Shu away from the Garnet Pavilion and tried to poison Li Shu to her end. Fa Ming asks what Maomao wants to keep quiet. With a murderous look on her face, she tells Maomao she'll give her anything, but Maomao tells her it's meaningless. Fa Ming walked to the window, speaking of everything she admired about Dua, and now deeply basks in the pain of causing the person she respected the most to lose her child. Back then, Dua even told her ladies not to blame themselves. With a look of dread on her face, Dua told them she knew a baby could die from even the slightest illness. She took her losses gracefully, but Fa Ming knew her lady cried herself to sleep every night, and reflecting on it shook Fa Ming to her core. Maomao knows no matter what, once she reports this to Jinshi, Fa Ming will receive capital punishment. So, Maomao offers her a solution. At night, Maomao returns to her quarters, completely worn out, having worn layers of stiffened oil paper, just in case an altercation would have happened. Reporting back to Jinshi, he got a report that Fa Ming turned herself in as Li Shu's poisoner. Jinshi asks if Maomao knows anything about this, but she denies it. In the report, Fa Ming's motive was listed as only wanting to keep Lady Dua in as a main concubine. However, Dua's relocation to a detached palace in the south was already decided a long time ago, before any of this. As Maomao works, she reflects on letting Fa Ming choose her own destiny. She let herself report in a way that prevented Abdul from ever finding out that she was the cause of the baby's death, even if Fa Ming were to die for it. Later that night, Maomao climbs up the castle wall to look at the sky, reflecting on Fa Ming's execution. Abdul appears before her, and she's set to depart the rear palace tomorrow. The two enjoy some drinks together, and Abdul explains that when her son left, she returned to being the emperor's friend, not his concubine. She was given the title only in pity, wondering why she held onto it for so long. She then poured the alcohol over the moat where her servant jumped to self-end to mourn her death. With Maomao climbing down the wall, a man's voice hollers at her, wondering what she's doing up there. Oh, it's Jinshi. Well, this is awkward, so Maomao tries to leave, but he grabs onto her. She looks back at him, seeing tears dropping down his eyes. He pleads with her to keep him warm, just a little longer. The next day, Abdul returns her crown of pure concubine to Jinshi, the very crown that will be bestowed to the next high concubine chosen. Looking at Abdul and Jinshi together, Maomao knew Abdul resembled someone, and they might as well swap outfits. Wait, last night, Abdul mentioned something about her son leaving her. Why didn't she say it died? It could almost be interpreted that her son is still alive. What if Abdul's and the dowager's sons were swapped? What if, despite the medical need for Abdul's delivery, Maomao's father was dragged away to tend to the Empress's baby? With Abdul knowing her baby would never been given priority, she allowed her son to be swapped with the Empress's to give him a chance to live a better life. What if people found out the babies were swapped later? If that was after the one baby had died, it would explain why Maomao's dad was physically punished for not noticing. This would explain why the emperor's younger brother is in a delicate position, and why concubine Abdul, who's supposed to be a realist, stayed in the rear palace for so long. Maomao sighed at the ridiculousness of this speculation. There's no way that could be true. Later, inside Jinshi's office, he reads a list of Fa Ming's family and those connected to them. But why is Maomao listed amongst them? After Fa Ming's death, her family's assets were confiscated, and all underwent varying degrees of corporal punishment. Fa Ming was determined to be the sole perpetrator in Li Shu's assassination attempt, so Abdul suffered no blame. The list Jinshi received also included people who did business with Fa Ming's family. The kidnappers who sold off Maomao were included in this list, hence why Maomao's name is here. But with Fa Ming's punishment, Jinshi fights with keeping Maomao's ties concealed. He doesn't want to lose Maomao, even knowing she'd follow any order a higher-up would give her, even death. Having lunch with Xiaolan, Maomao learns that the daughters of any family that had done business with Fa Ming's are being fired from the palace. Maomao thinks it's bad timing, knowing if she's let go and sent back home, the madam will probably put her into concubine work for not bringing back any more men. She ran desperately to find Jinshi. Knowing about the layoffs, she asks what's going to happen to her. Jinshi shows her the list of those associated with Fa Ming's family business, the page specifically with Maomao's name on it. And he asks her what she wants to do. She thinks as Lady Gyokuyou's lady-in-waiting, she can test for poisons and hang out in the medical office. She's been enjoying her current life, but being just a servant, she knows she's in no position to request to stay. She answers Jinshi, telling him she'll do as he orders. Manual labor, cooking, or tasting. She's almost pleading to stay. Jinshi gets up, telling her he understands. But Maomao is disappointed to hear she's being compensated and let go. Later, he's completely depressed, sitting in a corner. After a week of being fired, Maomao returned home to the pleasure district. But Gyokuyou wasn't happy about this. Gao Shun thinks back, remembering it's always been challenging to find Jinshi a new toy to replace his favorite one, even from when he was little. No, Maomao wasn't the same thing. Maybe Jinshi had let her go because he didn't want to treat her like a tool. Back at the Verdigris house, Maomao was getting dolled up by the three princesses. Her workplace tonight is a noble's party outside the brothel. Calling a courtesan to one's own mansion costs quite a sum. Calling one of the princesses is equivalent to what most make in a year, but calling all three at once? There must be no limits to how rich a rich person could be. Maomao is simply going to make the princesses look better in comparison. Luckily, she was paid more than expected when leaving the rear palace, so she was able to avoid getting sold off into courtesan work, at least for now. As they head out in carriage, Maomao reflects on how the madam really wanted her to become a courtesan, but she can't recite poetry or play the erhu, and she absolutely cannot dance. She's just an apothecary's daughter with no interest outside of medicine. As they walk through the mansion, Maomao notices every piece of furniture to be unimaginably expensive. They arrive at the entertainment room. Supposedly, the Haku was the one who arranged the introduction with these high-ranking nobles. The courtesans then displayed their impressive skills in song and dance. Maomao didn't mind the work, but smiling was getting exhausting. She found a familiar man in the back. Wondering if he was bored, she decided to sit by him. However, he just muttered the words, "Leave me alone." Noticing who it is, she utters his name, and he's surprised to see her, telling her that makeup changes her look considerably. He's shocked to learn she's working part-time as a courtesan, and sweating profusely upon hearing she hasn't taken any customers yet. He asks what if he bought her out, which she doesn't believe to be a bad idea. She wouldn't mind working at the rear palace again. Jinshi sighs. He thought she quit because she hated it there, but he misunderstood. She was trying to convince him to let her stay. Despite there having been a lot of trouble, she loved performing as a taster. The only thing she missed were her poison experiments. Jinshi laughed, warmly telling her she should probably stop playing with poison, but accepts that's who she is. A woman he endears, who doesn't express her feelings clearly. He tries to touch her face, but she pulls away, telling him rules are rules. He continually asks with persistence, so she sighs, allowing only just his fingers. He then wipes off some of her lipstick and gives it a kiss, leaving Maomao wide-eyed as he smiles with her lipstick on his lips. She blushes, looking away in embarrassment, and the three princesses laugh joyously looking at them, with Gao Shun even giving approval. Afterwards, the princesses playfully prodded Maomao, asking who the charming man was to her. As Maomao spent her days working at the verdigris house, mostly doing her regular apothecary work, she wondered how everyone was doing back at the rear palace. In a bath with the madam asked Maomao if she was going back to the rear palace, but Maomao was unsure. One night, she finds herself unable to sleep and steps outside to get some air. As she sits in the cold, it begins to snow, and she began reminiscing on her times at the rear palace. Sitting in those memories, she wondered what was going to happen from now on. A few days later, a beautiful noble came to the pleasure district, bringing the madam joy at all the money being offered to buy the courtesan with the apothecary skills. The noble then displayed a strange herb growing from an insect as a gift that brought the courtesan extreme joy. In the evening, Jinshi sits across from the emperor to drink. He reflects on no matter how hard he tries, he can only slightly outperform a regular person, but instead, he's been granted an appearance more beautiful than anyone. With the things he truly wants so far out of reach, he used to be dissatisfied, but now has gotten over it, and now uses his superior tools to his advantage. After all, he's just a child floundering on the emperor's palm. That's why he manages the rear palace, or whatever the emperor wishes. That's the only way he can choose his own path. Back at the verdigris house, Maomao helps Maomao prepare for her leave back to the palace, throwing in tons of makeup Maomao doesn't think she needs. The princesses gather around, hoping Maomao brings back plenty of rich men to the brothel. At night, as Maomao rests next to her father, he pats her head saying they'll both be lonely again at night, but at least she can come home anytime. Maomao reflects on how even though she has no mother, she has a caring dad, a nosy granny, and a lively group of big sisters to keep her company. On the day of her leave, as Jinshi waits, Maomao walks towards him all dolled up with her entourage, and seeing her makes him blush. In the carriage ride, Maomao blames him for all the unwanted attention. He's about to counter by saying she looks beautiful, but he stops, saying, "It's nothing." When they arrive at the palace entrance, even guards gawk at her, making Jinshi a little annoyed. So, Jinshi tells her to go back to her normal freckled form, as he feels the need to block other men from being around her, but she has no idea what he's doing. They arrive at Jinshi's house, Maomao's new workplace. With her being fired once, she can't be put back in the same position, so now she'll be working in the outer court, outside of the rear palace. Meeting with Jinshi in the living room, Maomao is surprised to hear she won't be doing any servant work, but instead will be preparing for the court lady exam. In the morning, she meets with Jinshi's court attendant, Shui Lian, to help serve breakfast. There, Maomao is surprised to learn that there are no other attendants, but understands when Shui Lian explains the young girls would always cause Jinshi trouble, such as leaving underwear made out of their hair in his closet. Ew. Seeing the tired Jinshi waking, Maomao thinks he has so much wasted sex appeal. If another woman saw this, she'd lose herself easily. Even guys might pounce on him right away. He truly has a sin-inducing air about him. Maomao then wonders if she could sell his scent as an aphrodisiac. As Maomao and Gao Shun go about their day, Maomao has a new perspective on Jinshi. He's apparently always been a busy guy. Gao Shun showed Maomao around the outer court, but there's so many buildings she had a hard time keeping up. Her ability to learn things she isn't interested in is pretty below average. After dropping off some charcoal into Jinshi's office, outside, Maomao notices the glares from some ladies. Perhaps they're sizing up the new girl. Maomao describes court ladies of the outer court to be like secretaries. They have the right qualifications, background, and education, unlike the hodgepodge of female officials at the rear palace, which would explain the outer court ladies' self-esteems. The girls come up to Maomao questioning why someone like her was assigned directly to Master Jinshi. However, Maomao can only focus on how well-fed the woman barking at her is. Maomao doesn't think it's a good idea for her to stay silent, so she asks them if they're jealous. Whoops, wrong choice of words. Maomao then approaches with better tact, telling them she's not getting special treatment. After all, she's ugly. Why would Jinshi go after meatless chicken bones when there are heaps of delicious abalones and boar meat in front of him? Even so, one of the women still questions why he'd hire Maomao, so she pulls out her ace in the hole, her wounds on her arm that look especially messed up since she had tried some burn medicine the other day. Maomao meekly tells them Lord Jinshi has a heart of gold, giving someone as pauper as herself a way to make a living. The ladies then take their leave. However, Jinshi had secretly been there all along, wondering if Maomao gets harassed like this often, but she escapes without answering. The day of the exams came, but Maomao failed. This doesn't deter her happiness though, as she still gets excited finding many herbs to pick. However, one of the court ladies comes by to whack her head, telling Maomao not to go beyond that point towards the military area, all while an onlooker smiles, having observed them. Another day comes, and with the arrival of the new pure consort that replaces Auto, Maomao is being assigned as her teacher for some reason by Lady Gyokuyou and Li Hua. Arriving at the assignment, Maomao kicks Jinshi out, with the lesson being for ladies only. The room is already seated with the 4 high concubines and their head ladies in waiting, with Maomao spotting the new pure consort, Lulan. With her age being 17, the emperor will probably spend more time with her. Maomao begins giving her teaching lessons based on all of her experience from the Verdigris house. Some laugh in joy at the techniques, some blush in embarrassment, with even Li Shu's soul leaving her body. After the day's lesson, Jinshi is surprised to see Gyokuyou and Li Hua pleased, Li Shu wishing she'd never heard any of this, and Lulan unfazed. Later that night, an explosion occurs in the palace, and Maomao wakes up to the scurrying of soldiers, but decides to go back to bed because it's cold. The man who observed Maomao earlier, Lo Han, investigates, reporting nothing to his associates even though there's a peculiar pipe on the ground. The next day, while getting distracted by herbs per usual, Maomao spots Lihaku, who adorns a new colored belt. He must have gotten a promotion. She heard after meeting Pyrin, he fell in love with her, and even though he can't afford a night with her on his salary, he has tea in the area at least to see her. After the two chat about Maomao's transfer to the outer palace, Lihaku explains he's been brought here to investigate the explosion, since no one has determined the cause. When hearing this, Maomao gets curious and starts looking around. She sees shrapnel all over the building. With this being an attempt of arson, it's easy to see why Lihaku was sent to investigate instead of a low-ranking official. Despite this building being a warehouse, Maomao thinks of its weight in terms of being a part of the palace to the emperor. The country of Li is overall pretty peaceful. However, there's always someone with issues. The occasional barbarian attack, famine or drought here and there. Who knows how long peace with neighboring nations will last? There may even be foreign countries who have complaints. Maomao then finds the ivory smoking pipe. She's lost in thought, even getting scolded by Lihaku. An explosion, food storage, a pipe. She then runs to a similar storage and gets supplies from Lihaku so she can do an experiment. She makes a box, putting flour in it. She has a flame rope readied, warning Lihaku that standing close is dangerous, but he doesn't listen. She scurries away, with the box exploding with flames lingering on Lihaku until they splash water on him. She determines the source of the explosion to be fine buckwheat powder, as it burns easily, and she presents the pipe that likely caused it. If someone had snuck inside the warehouse to take a quick smoke, the outside wind could flow in, blowing the powder into the air, and when lighting, the flour-filled air would catch on fire and explode, so people shouldn't smoke in the warehouse ever again. Maomao learned this because she had blown up a room at the verdigris house once. Later that night, Maomao realizes she accidentally brought the pipe home with her, but upon speculating, thinks it to be a little too expensive for a warehouseman. Later, Gao Shun brings a report to Maomao involving a bureaucrat who was poisoned by eating raw pufferfish. He wants her thoughts on it because 10 years ago, a similar case happened where the chef mentioned not using any pufferfish in his dish. However, in each case, the pufferfish guts were disposed of, where all the poison was contained. So how were each of these men poisoned? She sends Gao Shun to bring her more evidence. Then suddenly, Jinshi appears, asking what's going on, only to jump scare Maomao, who was lost in thought. The next day, Gao Shun brings the cook's notes, which contain everything served to their master. Maomao finds nothing unusual in the ingredient list, except for seaweed. She decides to get a look at the kitchen, and later is escorted by Basen, who doesn't seem to have a good impression of her for some reason, and also seems somewhat familiar to Maomao. As Maomao investigates the kitchen, a man comes screaming at them, asking why they're in his kitchen. Basen calms the man, telling him they're here on official business, and we learn the man is the poisoned bureaucrat's younger brother. Maomao finds a peculiar jar that contains some of the master's favorite snacks. And after the brother assures Maomao it isn't poisoned, she takes her leave. On the carriage ride back, Basen asks why she backed down so easily, but she didn't. She took some of the jar's contents with her. She finds the seaweed especially strange since it isn't in season yet, but even if salted and preserved from last year, it wouldn't last this long. It's not native to their region, perhaps imported from the south. Maomao then presents 2 plates of seaweed for Gao Shun, Basen, and Jinshi to look at. Maomao speculates that with a merchant learning this particular seaweed is a favorite of the bureaucrats, to profit from it, he had some locals produce a salted version of it. It's problematic because sometimes poisons can become not poisonous. For example, eels are usually poisonous, but after bleeding them or cooking them out, they become edible. In the case of seaweed, she believes it was soaked in lime water first. What she's brought before them is one batch soaked in lime water and one without, so she eats the soaked one, causing the guys to panic. But it's okay, because she has an emetic. Oh, guess they're just gonna shove it down her throat and make her vomit. Back at the task at hand, who suggested that the trader bring salted seaweed? If the bureaucrat suggested it be imported, of course it'd be his own fault in a sense. But if he didn't, bringing it from a region that doesn't eat it is obviously taking a big risk. With all that, the culprit turned out to be the bureaucrat's younger brother. Motive? Being the younger son, he wasn't treated well. He wanted his older brother out of the picture. Case closed. How did he learn about the seaweed poisoning? From a guy at a tavern, apparently. In Maomao's room, she contemplates all the exciting ways she can use the mushrooms growing on the dead bug she got from Jinshi. She gets so excited, she bumps into him and gives him a warm welcome home. And upon hearing this, he's so elated he starts banging his head into the doorway. As Jinshi relaxes with some tea, he complains about the military man who's been keeping him busy lately. A man who comes from a good family, past 40, not married, adopted his nephew as his son, and has him handle his housework. A famous weirdo whose only interests are go, shogi, and rumors. He constantly files complaints, barges in, and continually extends deadlines on decisions that need to be made. Jinshi believes this man has it out for him. However, as Maomao works, she has a bad hunch about who this man is. Lo Han, the military strategist, appears in Jinshi's office, bothering him the same way he described. He's somehow connected with the verdigris house, as he has ties to a courtesan he often played with. He considered buying the particular courtesan, as she had beaten him in shogi. She would sell her skills, but never herself. In fact, she didn't treat guests as customers at all. Even when pouring tea, she had an arrogant look, as if she was being charitable to a lowly peasant. However, many with a curious taste were head over heels for her, including himself, as the chills he felt down his spine to be irresistible, which reminded the guys of Maomao. She was too expensive, so Lo Han had used a trick to lower her value. But before finishing his story, he requests Jinshi to bring his new servant to solve a puzzling will left by one of the palace's metalworkers. With Jinshi curious, he decides to allow Maomao to handle the case. Jinshi details to Maomao about the metalworker who was the palace purveyor that had passed recently. He died without passing his techniques to his son. In the man's will, distribution instructions for his memento, which included the workshop shack for the eldest son, furniture with excellent workmanship for the second son, and a fishbowl for the youngest son. And one final note, saying they should all have a tea party together like old times. Maomao wonders if the term tea party has some kind of hidden meaning. However, Jinshi tells her the sons have no idea what that means either. Maomao also thinks the mementos seem unbalanced. Why does the last son only get a fishbowl? Is he so unloved? Maomao then gets escorted to the address of the metalworker's sons by Basen again. At the house, they're welcomed by one of the sons who shows them around. They are welcomed into the work shack, where the furniture appears oddly placed. As Maomao looks around, the eldest son gets impatient, asking if they can really help in figuring out their father's technique. It's just as Maomao and Basen have heard. The eldest was left this shack, the middle child this drawer, and the youngest a fishbowl, with the bowl being more valuable than first assumed, since it's actually made out of glass. The second son then mentions his father left him a key. However, it doesn't fit the keyhole he assumed it was for in the drawer, so the actual key he needs is nowhere to be found. He has no idea why his father would leave it for him. The eldest son was annoyed because he inherited the shack, but he can't move the drawer out, with the two sons envying the youngest because at least he got something he could actually sell. Their mother then enters, telling the boys to stop being rude to the guests. With her two sons having grown to be cynical and her youngest unable to express himself, she felt her husband was worried about them until the moment he died. With the tea served, the sons assumed their normal table positions. Maomao then noticed how the sunlight from the window should have hit the drawer, but how come the drawer has no sun damage? She looks at the window and then checks on the drawer, wondering if there's something stuck inside the keyhole. Basen checks in on her. Oh, that's why he looks familiar. He looks just like Gao Shun. Maomao then starts putting all the pieces of evidence together and something clicks. She has the youngest put his fishbowl where it used to be against the window and fills it with water. When lining up the symbol a certain way, it beams directly into the key lock and begins to burn. The key now fits, and inside they find a strange rock, the same kind their father used to collect. It seems the youngest is the only one who truly understood his dead father's intent. He wanted the three of them to work together. However, the older brothers felt they were inadequate compared to the younger, who was very talented at metalwork. With the mystery solved, the three brothers now get along and see Maomao and Basen off. Before taking off, however, she tells the youngest to visit an apothecary named Lo Men, her father, at the Verdigris House brothel. If they're ever feeling unwell, they should seek him out. Back in Jinshi's office, Lo Han explains how things turned out quite well for the metalworker's sons. The youngest bloomed to take over the craft work, the eldest handles the bookkeeping, and the second son finds new clients. They're all helping the family from different angles. With the task complete, Jinshi hopes to hear the rest of the story about the Verdigris House courtesans, and how to decrease their value. But Lo Han finds an excuse not to talk at all and takes his leave. Later, Jinshi meets with Maomao, asking if she can do his makeup. Maomao certainly thinks Jinshi doesn't need it, thinking there have been many silly wars in history, and several of them caused by beautiful women. If this man in all his heavenly beauty were to put on makeup, she wonders if he's trying to topple a nation or something. Jinshi remarks that her imagination goes too far sometimes. He's actually looking for something to put on his face to disguise himself. That night, Maomao preps several things and gets ready to go all out. The next day, she meets with Jinshi, surprising everyone when getting close to his hand. It was really just to tell him his incense smells too expensive. He needs to pick something else. Working at the brothel, they pick customers on appearance, but also by scent as well. Those with multiple showy scents tend to be rich, but have venereal diseases. Those who smell like livestock don't bathe and are unclean. Most new visitors to the Verdigris house are actually shooed away. Maomao then does some techniques to ruin the sheen of Jinshi's hair, and has clothing brought for him that smells a little bad, so it'll take away his expensive incense smell. Having Jinshi undress, she observes his physique. With his usual look being that of a heavenly maiden, she's surprised to see his body to be well balanced and muscular. But it's not good for his disguise, so they put stuff in him to change his overall shape and clothing, and then Maomao applies makeup so his face matches his attire better. She then gives him a horrible smelling drink that'll make his lips and throat swell so his voice can change, and then has Jinshi stuff his face with cotton to alter his face's shape. And with that, his transformation is complete. They then dress up Maomao as well, and the two ride in a carriage together towards their destination, with Jinshi under the alias of Jinka. Arriving near their destination, the two wander about the town, with their goal being a restaurant just outside the pleasure district, where Jinshi will be meeting an acquaintance, and Basen acting as their secret bodyguard. Along the way, Maomao gets Jinshi some skewers, and the two enjoy them in the little alleyway. They continue their walk, and Jinshi wonders why Maomao is in such a hurry, like she wants to split as soon as possible. Which is true, she wants Jinshi to get to his destination, so she can go buy some radishes and chicken. He then asks her if life at the palace is so bad. He thinks it is better than life in the pleasure district. She thinks it's fine, but often worries about her adoptive father, who is left by himself, which surprised Jinshi hearing she actually cared about someone other than medicine or poison. Jinshi gets intrigued hearing about the details of Maomao's father, who is a eunuch. They arrived at the restaurant, where Maomao can see the upstairs area is a brothel. She assumes this is the reason Jinshi had to disguise himself. But if it were to see a courtesan, she feels he could have just gone to the pleasure district. He then asks Maomao how one could decrease the value of a courtesan, something he originally wanted to know more about from strategist Lohan. Maomao finds the question unpleasant. She breathes a deep sigh, opening with the idea that there are many ways. At the verdigris house, girls take most of the important lessons while working as servants, and at that time are separated into those with beautiful appearances and those without. The latter, after debuting, immediately take on customers to sell their bodies. Those with talent, however, are taught tea ceremony and given higher education with which to entertain patrons. Thus, their prices increased. Once high enough, they start to appear only very rarely, and eventually, you reach top-ranking courtesans who cost a year's salary just to have tea with. Some retain their chastity until the day they're bought out. Their value comes from their purity. Losing that would easily halve their value. In addition, a pregnancy would reduce it to nearly nothing. After answering, as Maomao takes her leave, Jinshi grabs her arm, stopping her. He asks if she's going to leave without him, but of course, her going in would ruin the work of his disguise. As she leaves, she thinks it's all fine, because she said what she said without expressing too much emotion. Looking back as Jinshi enters the brothel, she wishes him a good night with a slight sadness. The sounds of a baby crying as a woman brings a blade right down towards it. This was a nightmare Maomao awakened from. It was a dream from when she was a baby. After breakfast, she gets a task from her father to deliver something to the verdigris house, and immediately gets attacked with a hug from Pyrin. It seems Pyrin is fighting with the madam over offers she's receiving, but with the two distracted, Maomao uses this as an opportunity to escape. She enters the annex to deliver, remembering this woman used to hatefully chase her out. But she must not have the energy any longer. The woman's illness worsens by the day, and her memories are in shreds. Maomao gives the woman medicine, but knows at this point it won't even provide temporary relief. Even so, giving the woman medicine is the only treatment they could think of. The verdigris house is now a reputable establishment, but a decade or so ago, it used to operate in shame. This courtesan served customers during that era, and was unlucky enough to contract syphilis as a result. When Maomao's father came to visit the verdigris house, the illness was in incubation. If he'd known about it then, he might have been able to treat her, but nobody trusted a eunuch who suddenly appeared out of nowhere. The courtesan had to serve customers. There was no other way to live. A few years later, when the rashes started to reappear, the sores spread almost instantly. Since then, this woman has been locked up in this annex, out of sight of the customers, which is quite generous considering courtesans who can't work are usually thrown in a ditch. Maomao gets a warning by one of the servant girls that the weirdo with the monocle is here, so she shouldn't go outside for a while. As long as she stays put, he won't come here. A longtime customer of the verdigris house, an old acquaintance. Maomao then notices the woman laying out rocks as if she's playing Go, thinking she's a stupid woman. Evening comes and Mei enters to let Maomao know the weirdo is gone for now. The two head to the bath together, where Maomao questions why Mei hasn't left, given she's just under 30, but is at a normal retirement age for a courtesan. However, she wants to keep working here just a little longer. Maomao doesn't know what's going through Mei's mind, and it's not a rabbit hole she wants to delve into. If it's what everyone knows as love, that's an emotion she's sure she left behind in the womb of her mother. Back at home, Jinshi is exhausted as he was surprised that the restaurant he was at was also a brothel, which he wanted no part of. He then brings the drink left by Lohan to Maomao to share with Shui Lian. While sitting with her, Shui Lian can tell Maomao's mind is wandering. She had hoped working would get her mind off the sickly courtesan, but it didn't. Shui Lian then has Maomao pick up some medicine, and she's excited because the outer palace pharmacy is much better than the rear palaces. She wonders what's inside the medicine cabinets, and would love to rummage through the whole place. Sui Ren then comes, asking what Maomao's doing. It seems she herself is here to resupply the medicines at the guardhouse. Observing her, Maomao wonders why the woman dislikes her. Later, as Maomao works, she contemplates on how mysterious Jinshi is. Not just about his work, but he often takes long baths, burns incense before leaving, and eats vegetarian food. It's like a purification ceremony. Are eunuchs allowed to perform ceremonial rites? It's not out of place for a noble to do that, but if he is such a high rank, why is he a eunuch? Was it a decision of the Empress Dowager? In Jinshi's office, Lohan enters to continue his discussion with Jinshi from earlier. It seems Lohan had been trying to convince the madam to give him Maomao for the last decade, and he feels as if Jinshi stole her from under his nose. He wants to buy her from Jinshi, but Jinshi isn't looking to sell, which gives Lohan a laugh, as he mentions there aren't many that could defy someone as high up as Jinshi, meaning he knows Jinshi's true identity. Lohan claims he's just concerned about his daughter, which strikes a nerve in Jinshi. He knows Lohan is Maomao's father by blood. Jinshi then comes by to Maomao later, telling her the weirdo official wants to meet her, the weirdo by the name of Lohan. The two stand in a minor silence, until Maomao gives him the dirtiest look, causing Jinshi to back away. So he assures her he'll find a way to turn Lohan down, as Maomao continues her work. He's never seen her like that before, and he never wants to see that again. Maomao gets distracted by herbs again, until Sui Rei finds her. Sui Rei begins to pick the weeds, which leads Maomao to ask what she's planting, only to become surprised hearing Sui Rei is planting something to resurrect someone. If such a thing exists, Maomao wants that more than anything, but it was just a joke. As Sui Rei leaves, she tells Maomao she'd just be planning some morning glories, with a sort of eerie and weird air about her as she leaves. In Jinshi's office, Gao Shun tells Jinshi about the medium ceremony this afternoon. However, Jinshi can't get Maomao's horrid look off of his mind. It left him distraught and distracted. Elsewhere, the Haku comes to Maomao telling her there's trouble. The same day that one warehouse had blown up, thieves had broken into a different one. What was stolen were some ceremonial tools, and no one knows the value of them either, as even the man with the most current knowledge on that warehouse had gotten sick from seaweed poisoning, the case Maomao solved more recently. The previous manager passed away last year. He had a sweet tooth. Oh, it was Master Conan. It's strange that two people connected to this warehouse died in incidents framed as accidents. Were the deaths in pursuit of some goal? The Haku then pulls out the expensive pipe he had gotten from Maomao. He tried to give it back to its owner, but they declined. The owner had apparently received it from some court lady, but why would they randomly give it to some warehouse guard? Apparently, the guard escorted the court lady outside the castle because she was walking alone in the dark, and she had given him the pipe as a token of gratitude. Maomao deduces that giving someone such an expensive item might compel them to use it right away, starting a fire to divert the guard's attention and break into another warehouse. This compels Maomao to ask about the court lady, but apparently she was wearing a scarf that hid her face. But she was described to be a tall woman that smelled like medicine. This made Maomao suspect Sui Rei, but she needed more evidence first. Maomao tries to convey that several coincidences could point to someone being the center of it all, which makes the Haku praise her for her intellect. However, Jinshi had been watching them, and feeling a little lonely. Seeing the High Lord, the Haku decided to flee. In Jinshi's office, after hearing the details, Maomao still explains she has no suspects, but feels like several traps were set in the hopes that some of them would work out. Jinshi is surprised Maomao isn't excited or curious about this case, like she usually would be, so he tells her about an interesting item in stock from a local trader, Ox Bezor, which makes Maomao light up just thinking of the medicinal gallstone only found in 1 in 1,000 cows, which makes her so excited she's practically panting on his desk, and she agrees to work hard with the Ox Bezor as her prize. During her investigation, Maomao finds out the officer who got food poisoning was from the Board of Rites. He and Master Conan were both related to ceremonies. If the incident with the pipe was to steal ceremonial tools, then these events, disguised as coincidences, must line up to form an intentional incident somewhere. There must be a ceremony that's important somewhere, medium or higher. Maomao needed to find out where these ceremonies took place. She gets a scroll with an image of a ceremonial building that's west of the outer court, called the Altar of the Sapphire Sky. The worker in the library then details how he used to work in that building, and was worried it would fall apart back in the day, as the pillar hanging from the ceiling seemed a little too big, and it could fall at any moment. It is quite concerning, because if the metal parts fixing the pillar in place broke, and the pillar fell, the person directly underneath performing the ceremony would be at the highest risk. If something important went missing from this building, surely they have someone make a new one. This thought then flashes the metalworker's sons in her mind. With their father having died recently, there wasn't anyone who could replace what was stolen. She dips out of the palace record room upon hearing the next ceremony is today. She makes it to the building, being stopped by a guard. She knows being a servant, she has no authority to enter, but if something happens, it'll be too late. She then baits the guard, accusing him of being part of the conspiracy involving the ceremonial hall theft, causing the guard to get furious and smack her. The pain is throbbing and she's on the verge of losing consciousness. She gets up with blood dripping. She can't give up now though. She reasons with the guard, knowing there must be someone of noble birth in the hall right now. If something were to happen to them, these guards would all lose their heads. The guard still isn't budging until Lohan enters the scene. He scolds them for hurting the young servant girl, making the guard begin to visibly pant. Maomao doesn't even want to see the person behind her, but there's no time. She makes a dash inside, and as the pillar comes crashing down, she saves the noble, giving the ceremony in the nick of time. She's gotta stitch her leg up though. What? It's Jinshi. I mean, I kinda knew that. Jinshi is confused at what's going on. He stares at her with a deep concern, wondering what happened to her face. As she passes out, Jinshi shakes her, pleading with her to wake up. He then carries her out of the hall, past her father, with a bloody trail following behind them. Maomao awakens, patched up in Jinshi's room. Shui Lian comes to greet her, telling Maomao not to push herself too much, as she has 15 stitches. In the living room with Gao Shun, Ba Sen, and Jinshi, Maomao explains how she knew about the falling pillar, the death of Master Conan, the fire at the warehouse that led to the death of the ceremonial tools, and the manager of said tools falling ill due to food poisoning at the same time. The metalworker that passed could no longer replace the stolen parts. Maomao wondered about Jinshi's true identity, and the connection of these incidents to Sui Rei. Later, Maomao learned she was right about Sui Rei being connected to these incidents from Lihaku, but was astonished to hear they had found her corpse, as when the officers came to her room, she had already drunk poison and was collapsed on the floor. More surprising though, is that there are no co-conspirators, with Lihaku calling this a closed case. However, Maomao becomes fixated on this. Sui Rei couldn't have possibly caused all these events by herself. Was she even the type of person to commit a self-end? Was she behaving apathetically and unemotionally because she knew she had no future? Then it came to Maomao, resurrection medicine. She ran out of her room, barely able to contain her excitement. She'd like to speak to the doctor who examined the corpse. In the morgue, Maomao is greeted by the doctor she knew would be there, the one that seemed close to Sui Rei. Maomao suspects that the poison Sui Rei drank was made by thorn apple, planted by Sui Rei, which looked like morning glories. The plant is poisonous, but in the right amounts, it can work as an anesthetic. Maomao then hacks open the coffin to reveal Sui Rei isn't inside, with the man tumbling, as he had cried when putting her body away. In other words, he'd been exploited with his care for her, so much that he didn't cut open her corpse to find out what poison she used. It was exactly as Sui Rei expected. Hearing this from Maomao pissed the doctor off. Jinshi asks what about Sui Rei's corpse, and Maomao explains she most likely walked out on her own and wasn't dead, due to a drug that can make a person seem dead for a period of time, which used ingredients from thorn apple and pufferfish. Maomao then discovers the now empty coffin Sui Rei was really in that had fingernail marks. By the time the rescuers had come back to open it, she had come back to life. They set up a different coffin with another corpse to replace it, then disguised her as a vendor to walk out. Maomao begins to giggle, knowing if the corpse had gotten cremated, Sui Rei would have won, but not on Maomao's watch. If she's still alive, Maomao wants to meet her, not to arrest her, but a person with such a high intellect and guts to bet her life that she'd make it out would be such a loss. Maomao laughs further, desiring to learn how to make the medicine that can bring people back to life. Oh, it seems she laughs so hard she needs her wounds to get restitched. That night, Jinshi reflected on what he discovered about Sui Rei. According to the doctor, she was backed by his teacher, who had taken note of her talents a few years ago and brought her as an adopted daughter. But still, not much is known about her past before then. However, that's not the only thing he's concerned about, with Lohan being in the back of his mind as well. He then reflects on his return to the rear palace tomorrow and who he must be, his refined mannerisms, heavenly smiles, and a voice like honey. The 24-year-old man who became a eunuch when the rear palace became the current emperor's 5 years ago. That's Jinshi. From that day, he decided to wear this mask, drinking this medicine every day to suppress his manhood. When Gao Shun mentions this medicine will one day make Jinshi impotent, Jinshi spits it out, saying the same will happen to him. But Gao Shun is fine since his children are now adults, and he even has grandchildren. Even his youngest son, Ba Sen, is ready to marry at 19, just like Jinshi. Jinshi plays it off saying Jinshi the eunuch is 24, but he can tell Gao Shun wants him to end his work and find a wife. The next day, they meet with concubine Lolan, who the emperor apparently doesn't find very appealing. She's very fashionable, changing her hairstyle and makeup often, but this confuses the emperor somewhat. When meeting her every time, it's hard to tell who she is. Lolan's father is an important high-ranking official who was the previous Empress Dowager's favorite, so they need to be careful around her. In terms of lacking appeal, concubine Li Shu is similar. The current emperor despises his predecessor's taste for younger girls. He doesn't intend to lay a finger on Li Shu. The Empress Dowager, who gave birth to the current emperor when she was just a girl, also gave birth to another child, some 10-odd years later. At that time, the doctor spent all his time tending to the Empress Dowager, so the birth took place without an issue. However, Dul, who gave birth at the same time, received no attention, resulting in the loss of her uterus. The current emperor's firstborn child was soon lost after. If he had survived... No, Jinshi just felt he needed to have a new prince. Later, Maomao takes an assignment back to the rear palace. With Lady Gyokuyou's lunar cycle having stopped, she might be pregnant again. Maomao did the same work as she had done as a lady-in-waiting, tasting for poisons. Seeing the emperor with Ling Li gave Maomao a better impression of him as not just some lewd middle-aged guy. At the verdigris house, Li Haku is distraught to hear rumors that one of the 3 princesses is being bought out. Maomao heads to work at the Jade Pavilion, but is summoned by Li Haku, who wants to know the cost to buy out a courtesan. Maomao opens his question with the 2 candidates who would be eager to buy Pairin. The first, an old master of a merchant family who had come to the verdigris house, even when they were struggling. And the second, a high-ranking official in his early 30s who's apparently very compatible with her in bed. However, a point of concern is how tired he looks the next day. Li Haku is unsure on what Maomao means by this, so she elaborates. Anytime Pairin feels unsatisfied in bed, she'll try to seduce anybody and everybody. She's a nymphomaniac. But even so, she really helped raise Maomao, so she also has a strong maternal side. Maomao thinks of Li Haku being in love with Pairin while fully understanding what her job is. He's an incompetent dog, but also an earnest man, a lovable idiot who's working to climb the ranks for a woman, and he seems to have the stamina to last with Pairin. He's not a bad candidate to buy her out. After telling Li Haku Pairin's upfront cost of 10,000 silvers, he gets depressed knowing the price is 10 years of his salary. But he could still manage. She then tells him to take off his clothes, so she can figure out if Li Haku has the kind of body Pairin would like. And man, he's certainly ripped. Maomao observes him in different poses, believing this could actually work. Except she needs him to remove his last article of clothing. But suddenly, Jinshi barges in, not looking too happy. Upon learning she was called for help, and was closely studying Li Haku's physique, Jinshi certainly doesn't get any happier. Maomao can apparently tell a person's lifestyle by simply looking at someone's physique. Oftentimes, clients don't divulge their lives much to an apothecary, so it's a skill she learned over the years. Jinshi asks if she could figure him out by looking at his body, which surprises Maomao because she can tell he's jealous of Li Haku. But not the way she was thinking, as Jinshi is surprised to hear he's not the body type for big sister Pairin. In his room, Li Haku trains his body to deal with his troubles buying Pairin. He gets a knock on the door and somehow ends up face to face with Jinshi. Jinshi found out about him looking to buy Pairin and offers him a loan of 20,000 silver. Li Haku thinks it's strange for Jinshi, a stranger, to offer him help, but it's because Maomao trusts him and Jinshi looked into his background. He's the son of a regional official and squad leader. Li Haku finds the offer tempting, but he feels he doesn't need that much, maybe only even a quarter of that. He declines Jinshi's offer because Pyrin is a woman he's serious about. How can he call himself a man if he can't buy her out with his own silver? Hearing this, Jinshi smiles and takes his leave. Throwing the offer out of the window, Lihaku is unsure about what to do for money. Maybe he can show off at the next training session or ask for more work. He doesn't know when he'll see her, but he doesn't want to just buy her out without telling her. He wants to know how she feels. Receiving a message from Pyrin herself, Maomao learns that Lihaku doesn't need all that money he's hoping to raise, as long as she loves him. But the confusion with a courtesan being purchased is probably coming from the fact that Lohan was looking to buy someone. A new spring began, and Lady Gyokuyou's pregnancy became a certainty. Little Lingli loved to play with her mother's tummy. She then brings some paper over to Maomao so they can draw together, and when Maomao draws her a poisonous mushroom, Hongnian gives Maomao a scolding smack. In Jinshi's office, Lohan discusses a blue rose, as he's looking to have Jinshi arrange them somewhere in the palace. With roses being out of season, Jinshi comes to Maomao for help, to have the roses done for next month's garden party, only to get upset when even she mentions roses won't bloom for another 2 months. After learning the request is from a certain military weirdo, Maomao takes on the job regardless, because she doesn't want to run away from him forever. She'd love to crack that smirking monocle of his. Day after day, Maomao works with Xiaolan in the steam bathhouse she had built in the Crystal Pavilion to make an artificial garden house for the roses to bloom. Maomao was exhausted, not seeing any success, working herself to exhaustion, until one day, Xiaolan shows her a budding flower. The day of the garden party comes, with the debut of the new pure consort, Lolan, who's taking Gyokuyou's seat this year due to her being pregnant and needing to keep it a secret. Jinshi walks forward, handing a vase filled with a variety of colors, including the blue roses Lohan had requested. With many onlookers staring at him with jealous eyes, he finds most concerning are the people he can't read, like Lolan's father Shisho, who won the Empress's affection, and even more troublesome, the military strategist Lohan. Maomao wakes up after resting on Yinghua. Jinshi comes over to ask how Maomao achieved the creation of the blue roses. She explains they were all originally white, and she had dyed them using colored water. But with the final stage set, she was ready to confront her father. Maomao challenges her father to a game of Go. Best of 5, first to win 3 matches wins. If Lohan wins, Maomao will become his daughter. But if Maomao wins, he must buy a courtesan out from the verdigris house. She won't say who though. 2 more rules though. Maomao presents some liquid that with 3 mouthfuls would become a strong poison. She pours the liquid into 3 out of 5 cups and scrambles them so they randomize. After each match, the winner chooses a cup for the loser to drink. And the second rule, if someone forfeits, they lose. With the first loss, Maomao must drink. A second loss, and she drinks again. The third match, Maomao wins with a checkmate. However, it's because Lohan lets her win. He can't let his daughter take poison, even by accident. He deliberately lost so he can make an attempt to drink 1 cup of poison, avoiding Maomao's potential end. And he gets it right away, freaking Jinshi out, knowing Maomao has lost her ace in the hole. However, Lohan doesn't feel so good and passes out on the spot, confusing Jinshi. Maomao gives him some water and explains he's not actually poisoned. He's just a lightweight when it comes to drinking. Looks like Maomao's won, so Lohan is going to buy a courtesan from the verdigris house. Lohan spent his whole life only thinking of everyone as Go pieces, pawns with their proper places in life, until he played Go against an unbeatable courtesan from the verdigris house named Feng Shen. So confident in his abilities, he began laughing because she completely dominated him. But he was surprised to see what a human face truly looked like. Her eyes were balsam fruit, which could pop with a single touch. They kept playing Go and chess for several years. Feng Shen was born at the brothel. Her personality was only shaped by pride. With her talent, her price kept going up and up, so much she could only afford to see her once every 3 months. This price kept going up, in a bidding war amongst her fans. Though Lohan had climbed the ranks as a military man, his stepbrothers had taken his right to inherit the family title. He could never dream of reaching her price. One day, however, they played a game of Go, where the loser would give the winner anything they desired. While playing, their hands eventually held each other and they spent the night together. Later, due to some family issues, Lohan was forced by his father to study abroad for 3 years. He didn't think it would have taken so long to come back. On his return, letters piled up from Fengxian, with one particularly bloodied, and a sack that he thought were branches at first. However, he was horrified to realize they were her fingers. He ran as hard as he could through the pouring rain. The small finger represented something he was too foolish to realize at the time. He arrived screaming at the verdigris house, asking for Fengxian, getting beaten by the madam for his foolishness. He had never considered why she had lost her value and was no longer getting buy offers, was that she was pregnant with their child. He knew a courtesan who lost all value would have to receive any and every customer for money, leading to diseases. He screamed in misery over his grave mistake he made, drowning in his failure. Lohan woke up in the verdigris house to Maomao, who used to be an apprentice to Fengxian. Maomao served him tea, which he spat out quickly because it was so bitter, but became happy learning that Maomao had made it. Looking at the gift he received from Maomao, Lohan couldn't help but think he wanted to be with the daughter Fengxian left for him. He hated his daughter, but still wanted her near him, and is displeased that man put his hand on his daughter 3 times during his Go match. The madam then brings Lohan to take his pick for courtesan purchase. However, no matter how beautifully they dress, all of them look like Go stones to him. He comes toward Maomao because she's always been good to him. However, she walks towards the door, and hearing a song from a familiar woman, Lohan runs towards the song despite the madam not wanting him near her. He now understood the message Maomao was trying to tell him with the flower she sent. There's a flower for him that has retained its beauty, despite the fact that it withered, and inside the annex, he finds Fengxian singing a song while looking at the moon, and it brings him to shed a tear. The madam follows, telling him to get out and pick from the other courtesans. But no matter what, he wants this woman. He'll pay whatever the madam wants, 100,000, 200, or whatever. Oh man, I really teared up a little watching this. Lohan puts the ghost stones in Fengxian's hand, and seeing her beautiful face, he tells her, "Let's play Go," weeping in joy at the sight of the smiling beautiful woman, just as he remembered. Seeing this brings Maomao to tears as well, wishing Fengxian had been honest about her feelings from the start. Lohan will buy this woman who's beautiful as a balsam flower. Back in the palace, Basen scoffs, remarking that troublesome father and daughter duo, referring to concubine Lolan and her father, who had pushed hard to get his daughter in the rear palace. Maomao gets served a meal for all her hard work, but before she can eat it, Jinshi comments on how he thought Maomao hated the weirdo strategist. She replies she doesn't hate him. After all, she exists because of him. Knowing her mother, she wouldn't have gotten pregnant if she didn't want to. There's drugs to prevent or abort pregnancies, so ending it would have been easy early on. She recalls her mother must have lost her mind when things hadn't worked out, so much that she was willing to hurt herself. She brings up the fact that Lohan never visits Jinshi outside of his office. It's because Lohan can't recognize human faces. Jinshi is unsure of what she means until she explains her father can tell the shapes of eyes and mouths, but he's unable to view the parts together as a whole. She learned this from her adopted father, but for some reason, he's able to discern Maomao's and Lomen's faces. She definitely dislikes her father, but doesn't hate him. She's just grateful she was able to become Lomen's daughter, but respects her biological father's intellect, as he was able to help her save Jinshi. He doesn't make the decisions the same way Maomao does using evidence, but instead his gut feeling. Maomao is only annoyed because if her father had taken action based on that feeling, she might have had her hands on the resurrection drug right now. Later, Maomao learns of the details from Maomao on who Lohan had bought. Maomao still plans on doing courtesan work for a bit longer, but when she does get bought up, she'd love for Maomao to dance with this shawl. At night, on the castle walls, Maomao practices her graceful dance among the stars. Surprised to see Jinshi had been watching. This startles her, causing her to trip and nearly fall off the wall, only for Jinshi to barely catch her. She wonders what he's doing here, but he got a report that another weird woman was climbing the outer wall. He pats her on the head, telling her not to cause any more trouble. He then has her explain herself. In the pleasure district, when sending off a courtesan who's been bought out, it's customary for the other courtesans to dance. Jinshi is surprised she knows how to dance. However, she was taught dancing as a part of the bare minimum of education. Jinshi then details how he heard Lohan had bought out a courtesan, and how he'll be on vacation for at least 10 days. At the verdigris house, they're apparently having a banquet for a whole 7 days and nights. Oh, it looks like Maomao's wounds have opened up again. She'll definitely need some restitching. But Jinshi isn't gonna let her do that here. He grabs her and jumps down the wall and puts her in a princess carry. I'm sure she wasn't expecting that. As they go together, Maomao has something important to say to him. Something she's been meaning to say for a while. She grabs his face, getting close, and tells him she'd like that ox bazoar now. Getting upset, Jinshi headbutts her, and the two continue together under the stars. Ah, that was amazing. And luckily, Season 2 was announced, so we are definitely getting more. Subscribe to the channel as I'll cover it when it releases. For now though, watch this next video. It's me, ComfyTea. I'll see you all in the next one.